Right, hi everyone, welcome back to another lecture. Alright, this time I'm going to continue with our social studies. I'm going to talk about Unit 3, okay, which is working for the good of society. Okay, so I'm going to look at a few things here today. These are learning objectives, things that after you watch this entire lecture, you'll be able to understand and all these learning objectives here. And of course, if like always, feel free to take this down to check once you're done with the video whether you understand all of these concepts, right? Let's just begin. Let's not waste time here today. Okay, today we're going to talk about this concept of working for the good of society. So the different roles that we have. First and foremost, we're going to talk about government's role, and then we're going to talk about citizens' role. Okay, so role of government. Let's take a look at the first thing here. Maintaining internal security. That's the first rule of government, right? So I want you to take note of this word internal. Later, you understand why this word is important. But first, let's take a look. Internal security, all right, is essentially helping to maintain internal order in the country. So the agencies that do that, all right, these are called internal security agencies, right? So they protect citizens, so the lives of citizens as well, their property, right, be it public or private property, and whatever society believes should be protected. So including things like monuments, artifacts, all these things are things that society believes should be protected, and therefore the government is obligated to protect them. Okay, important social services such as schools, hospitals, all of these must be protected so that they can function properly under peace and secure conditions. Okay, so unfortunately, recently there has been a lot of talk about, you know, uh, security at schools and hospitals, all these things being attacked, unfortunately, by some people with heinous intents, right? So, we our internal security agencies all need to uh, work together to protect all these very important places. If not, there may be a lot of disruption, lives that are lost, property that is severely damaged, infrastructure that gets damaged as well. So the work of the internal security agencies and of course this role of the government is very, very important. Now, in Singapore, right, maintaining internal order, all right, falls under Ministry of Home Affairs. Okay, please note the word home, right? So, last lesson we actually talked about the different ministries in Singapore, right? So today we're gonna focus firstly on MHA. Now, the first internal security agency that we have in Singapore is the Casino Regulatory Authority, CRA. Now, a lot of students ask me, Cher, why is it CRA is under internal security? And why do we even need a CRA in the first place? Right? The answer is very, very simple. Okay? You can read this description here, right? So run honestly, don't come under the influence of gangs. Why? Because casinos, alright, if you didn't know, are sometimes used for fronts as fronts for criminal activity. Most commonly, it's either like dealings or money laundering, stuff like that. Often goes through casinos, right? So their job, okay, CRA's job is to ensure that casinos are not put under the influence of any gangs or any criminal behavior. Nothing of the sort is happening in Singapore's casinos, right? So also they ensure that gaming in a casino is conducted honestly. So no cheating, no card counting, no such thing. No, 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 no. All of these are against the law. Of course, one of the important aims, and this comes with the remember last week we talked about the integrated results, right, with the casinos and whatnot, the social costs of those decisions, right? CRA actually also does enforce certain regulations that prevent vulnerable persons like minors from entering casinos because this is deemed as certain behavior that is not very good for society. So we don't want to inculcate a habit of problem gambling, especially. So which is why you can see the CRA is actually quite an important agency as well. Next, CNB, the Central Narcotics Bureau. Okay, narcotics is essentially illegal drugs, right? So their main purpose is to ensure that Singapore remains drug free, right? I'm sure all of you are very familiar with this agency. They're the people that come into your school every year to tell you about the dangers of drugs and why you shouldn't take drugs and all that stuff, right? So this is part of their preventive education campaigns, right? Especially to vulnerable persons like minors, right? So they are also a law enforcement agency. They are the frontline agency for anything related to illegal drugs, anything from uh, drug dealing, drug trafficking, all the way up to syndicates and whatnot. So CNB does do a pretty good job at keeping Singapore relatively drug free, right? Next, home team agency. Okay, home team agency is the people that you see all those buildings called home team NS all around Singapore. Yeah. So home team agency is actually the department, all right, that coordinates all this training and guidance for instructors, development officers, and different parts of the civil service as well. Okay, so most likely they will be doing some sort of expertise sharing, knowledge sharing between the different home team departments. So all your internal security agencies, and sometimes also the external security agencies as well. They will all come together. They will learn, and they will develop skills, alright, that help to keep Singapore even safer. ICA, we should be very familiar with it by now, alright? ICA is the Immigration and Checkpoints Authority, right? These are people that are ensuring that Singapore's borders are always safe. And of course, they are the people that issue you your IC, your passports, and whatnot. Okay, yeah. So ICA is the first line of defense against any threats that are incoming to Singapore via the borders. So land borders, ports, seaports, and airports, all of them, these protected areas are protected by ICA. Okay, so any immigration related laws, they will be enforcing that as well. And they of course stop any undesirable people or undesirable goods from entering Singapore and causing harm to Singapore society. Next, internal security department. All right, these people are the ones that actually help to gather intelligence for Singapore, and of course their job is to neutralize any threats to Singapore's safety, security, and sovereignty. Okay, so these are the people that are functioning under the Internal Security Act. Okay, so they will detain anyone that is deemed as a threat to Singapore's security and stability, right? So including more recently, they're not terrorist cells or stuff like radicalized Singaporeans. All of these ISD will handle. And we'll come back to ISD, in fact, in the last chapter on security impact of globalization under the transnational terrorism part. Okay, but for now, you just need to know ISD is a agency that does intelligence and protection of domestic security. Okay, Singapore Civil Defence Force (SCDF) should be very familiar with it, right? So these are people that provide you your firefighting, rescue, medical, emergency services, essentially. So the ambulances, your fire trucks, all of these are under SCDF. They also do sometimes hazardous materials problems, anything, and they also plan for disasters. Disasters mainly they do fire safety as well, but of course, anything related to this civil defense they will also handle. So peacetime emergencies, wartime emergencies, all these things under the purview of SCDF. Singapore Police Force, again, not something that you should be very unfamiliar with, right? SPF are police force. They are here to protect people from criminal harm and crime. They also do protect Singaporeans against terrorism and public disorder as well. These two you might not be very familiar with, but these are the people that are involved with the prisons and rehabilitation process. Right, SPS is for those that are currently inside the prisons in Singapore. So they ensure that the custody of prisoners are kept safe, prisoners are not maltreated, and of course, rehabilitation of these offenders. Now, SCORE is an agency that helps ex-inmates, people that have been released from prison, to regain this employability, okay, in Singapore's workforce. So the rehabilitation process, all right, is something that Singapore focuses very, very greatly on, okay, and we take um, all these ex-offenders, we help them to rehabilitate. I have no idea what I was writing then. We help them to rehabilitate into Singapore society. Of course, they can turn over a new leaf and help Singapore's economy by contributing to the national workforce once they are released from prison. Okay, now that was internal security. Now, this is a very important point I'm going to make here. Now we're going to talk about external security. Okay, so one thing you need to note, and this is something a lot of students get confused over. Internal security is managed by Ministry of Home Affairs. Home Affairs runs police, runs SCDF. As you'll see later, alright, police, SCDF, and armed forces different. Police and SCDF are home affairs. Army, Navy, Air Force under Ministry of Defense. These are two separate things, alright? The Singapore Armed Forces maintains external security, which is why just now I told you to take note of the word internal. Okay, internal security is anything to do with domestic threats, so anything from within. External security, this is protection of Singapore from outside threats. So any threat of a territorial invasion, any threat of incursion, all these things are all managed under the external security agencies. Okay, so in this case, we'll talk about two things: Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, let's start with MINDEF first. Like I said just now, Singapore Armed Forces, or the SAF, is there to deter any aggression. Okay, so we use our military hardware to defend Singapore. Okay, in the event that any deterrence fails and this any enemy still comes forward and tries to attack Singapore and take over Singapore as an island or as a city state or whatever, then Singapore Armed Forces will be put into action to engage in war to protect Singapore's sovereignty. Sovereignty, another word for it, I think you can link it to the word independence. Okay, although these two words may not be completely similar, but at this level, I think you can take it as just about the same thing. Okay, so SAF, as you know, comprises of Army, Navy, and Air Force. Recently, I think there's a new department on digital defense as well. That will be coming up quite soon. But for now, let's focus on these three. Army, of course, is doing all the little spectrum of operations all across the land, battlefield essentially. These are the people that would usually operate your tanks and artillery and whatnot. Yeah, so all these things fall under the army, and of course sometimes they do in peacetime help out the internal security agencies in day-to-day protection of Singapore, especially at key installations such as the airport like Changi Airport, Seletar Airport, and of course your military bases, right? And any important top secret or government facilities, yeah, you typically see army personnel there as well, helping out the internal security agency officers. Navy, of course, these are people who will protect Singapore's territorial seas. So, of course, they will defend the sea. They will utilize weapons and armaments that are suited for sea combat or marine combat rather, right? And the Air Force, all right, is protection of the skies, our airspace, and they also do provide reinforcements for our Navy and Army if it's needed. Okay, next, that is quite straightforward. Next, we have Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, a lot of students are also confused. Why is MFA inside the topic about external security? And the answer is very simple. Okay, external security, right? Sorry about this. External security is split into two parts: military and diplomacy. Military was established because we know that Singapore, as an independent country, we have to protect ourselves. Nobody else is gonna, protect us for no cause or no reason whatsoever. Okay, so we know we only have ourselves to rely on in the event of any such threats to Singapore's independence and sovereignty. But in peacetime, Singapore focuses on diplomacy. We try to get as many friends as possible on the international stage, and this has been Singapore's foreign policy since our independence. Even with our first foreign minister, who actually came up with this idea, or this doctrine rather, Mr. S. Rajaratnam. Okay, so diplomacy, all right, Singapore establishes diplomatic connection, diplomatic relationships with pretty much anybody who is willing to. All right, so we are friends with pretty much most countries in the world. So the idea is that, if we have more friends, there is a lot less likelihood that any of the countries in the world would come and attack us. And even if one day that does happen, we will have a big pool of friends to count on to help us in our time of need, and even to help us in our defenses. All right. So so diplomacy is that. Fun fact: we actually have diplomatic relationships with a lot of countries in the world, even countries like North Korea. Yeah. So they see Singapore as a good friend, and used to be a trading partner until the UN sanctions kicked in. And I think that's one of the reasons why the North Koreans actually chose Singapore for their North Korea US summit in 2018. Okay, yeah, so diplomacy. Now, like we said here, MFA establishes good relations with other countries at bilateral and multilateral. Okay, these two terms are important because they will pop up and probably it won't tell you what it means. Okay, but bilateral simply means between two countries, or between two parties rather. And multilateral means between multiple parties. Okay, so when we say bilateral treaties, it basically means a treaty between two countries, ourselves and someone else. A multilateral treaty is a treaty between multiple parties, one of which includes ourselves. Okay, yeah. So one of the programs that we do, alright, is this thing called the SCP, Singapore Cooperation Program. Essentially, when a country needs help, right? So Singapore will usually send aid, humanitarian aid, to these countries to help them in their time of need. Now, this of course is to help them as well. We have our sincere reasons for that. But of course, we through this program, through our help, we also earn goodwill with these countries. So in the event Singapore does need help, we can actually call on the support of these countries that we've helped previously in the past to help us with any issues that Singapore may face in the future. Okay, so examples for this is, for example, anytime there is some sort of issue, for example, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, if there is like a earthquake in Nepal, if there is a flood in China, in Malaysia, or if there's some issues in the neighboring countries, we will usually send help to help out these countries lah. Okay. Now, MFA's another job is also to provide consular assistance. Now, you might have heard this consular term before. Okay, it comes from the word consulate. Now, consulate is essentially one of those officers, right, that have Singaporeans stationed there to help out Singapore citizens whenever they are abroad, right? So you always hear MFA advising, oh, please register with the nearest embassy or consulate when you're traveling overseas. Yeah, this is so that we know that you're inside this foreign country, and in the event of any problems, we can contact you and assist you and get you back home if necessary. Right, so if you're caught in natural disaster, earthquake lah, flooding or whatnot, the consular officers from Singapore in those countries who are already stationed in those countries, they will come to your aid if they can. And yeah, so it's important, right? And in the event that you need any help when you're in a foreign country, you should go and find the nearest Singapore representation abroad. So either an embassy, a consulate, or trade office, or whatever. These are all run by Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also work with other international organizations, notably the United Nations, right? So Singapore being a seafaring country, we are part of the negotiation of one of these, the most impactful UN treaties, right? So the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Okay, so this actually sets out the exclusive economic zone. So essentially is this, that if this is a country's land, then up to like, I think I can't remember exact statistic, but up to like say 20 nautical miles, this is still land, alright, or sorry, up to this, like, is still territory of the country, and then we have an exclusive economic zone, which the country that owns it actually does have exclusive rights to stuff like fishing or drilling of oil that happens within this part of the sea. Of course, this caused some problems, especially in the South China Sea, right, where multiple countries are overlapping, the claims are overlapping with one another, which is causing some problems. Okay, but all you need to know is that MFA practices diplomacy by working with international organizations to achieve global cooperation. Okay. Yes. Of course, another one of our international organizations, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, obviously. Yeah. So Singapore actually, when ASEAN was formed in 1967, Singapore was one of the first founding members of ASEAN. A lot of other countries simply came along afterwards, right? Singapore has contributed to the ASEAN countries as part of the agreement, right? So when Vietnam invaded Cambodia in 1978, Singapore actually sent troops to defend Cambodia from the invading Vietnamese, right? And of course, as a diplomatic country, as a country that prefers diplomacy over war, right? Any dispute we have with other countries, we will usually take it to diplomatic means first. So the issue of Pedra Branca. Pedra Branca is actually this very small offshore island that is quite far away from Singapore mainland actually, but it still falls within Singapore territorial water. Alright. Malaysia actually claimed Pedra Branca. Singapore also claimed the same island. Instead of fighting it out with a war over the territory and whatnot, both parties decided to bring this dispute to the International Court of Justice, which is run by the United Nations, right? And it's a court where they have like it's essentially a court lah, like a normal court in Singapore, but they deal with international incident. Okay, so in this case, Singapore versus Malaysia, and this is all the spirit of ASEAN, right? So we choose not to resolve dispute through war, but we talk it out first. So through diplomacy first. Okay, yeah, and other things such as international conference for climate change, environment, small nation protections, and whatnot. All of these things Singapore is always a keen member of, and is always willing to contribute our ideas to help the global scene, essentially. So that was maintaining external security. Next, the third role of government, ensuring justice. Okay, so ensuring justice, all right. In the last lesson, we talked about the judiciary. So we remember we said the judiciary is one of the organs of government, all right, and they are there to adjudicate any laws and to see if any laws, all laws are executed fairly. Okay, so yeah, so one example of this, remember we talked about family justice courts, right? So one of the example of how government actually helps people or to protect people is family violence as a problem, domestic violence, family violence. If a court in Singapore, usually family justice court, concludes that a certain individual faces harm, okay, then they will be granted a personal protection order. Okay, with this PPO, anybody, okay, that you are having this order against, you will be protected from them by the government, by the justice system. You can think of it as similar to what they have in the US, this term called restraining order. It's not 100% the same, but it is a similar idea. So this is how the government does help to ensure justice for those that are unfairly treated, or those that are victims as well. And the fourth role of government, one that's arguably also very very important, providing goods and service. Okay, so of course, as a government, you have responsibility to provide your citizens access to essential things such as water, food, shelter, sanitation, healthcare, whatnot. Okay, so everybody needs access to these things for well-being. So the government must ensure that first, these goods are easily available and any service standards are high. Okay, if particular citizens cannot afford these essential goods and services, the government should also provide subsidies. Subsidies being like you can think of it as a discount of sorts, right? Discount provided by the government so that you are able to afford certain things. So stuff like your financial assistance and whatnot, these are all part of subsidies. Yeah. So for example, continuously ensuring that our transportation network in Singapore is improved and whatnot, so that people can still have access to transportation, and not just access to transportation, good transportation, effective transportation, efficient transportation, right? So we have to hold it to a high quality, because this is all very basic essential things that any country needs for its citizens. And the fifth one, the fifth role of government, safeguarding interests of the citizens. So the government has a responsibility, all right, to protect interests of citizens. Now, what's our interests? Rights of workers. So, protection against abuse by employers. So Singapore's government has initiated this work right initiative, all right. This clearly tells everybody that these are the rights of all workers in Singapore, and to protect these workers from abuse by employers. Okay. CPF, okay, protecting people's needs. CPF scheme essentially allows for these Singaporeans to have sufficient money, okay, for anything from housing needs, healthcare, so and retirement fund essentially. Okay, so housing, of course, you can use your CPF to pay for HDB flats. You can use it for as a MediSave, right? That is under CPF as well. So we'll talk more about this in a later issue as well. And retirement years. So after you retire from the workforce, CPF will ensure that you still have money to survive the remaining years of your life. And this is important. Remember, as we all know, life expectancy in Singapore has increased. There is more and more Singaporeans that are growing older and older and older and older. With this increased age expectancy, people will need more savings to last them through the entirety of their lives. And this is very, very important for the government. So they introduced different things. For example, CPF Life. 2009, they introduced CPF Life as a way for people to have these monthly payouts, right? So that there will be enough money for them to use so long as they're alive. All right, savings of the individuals, contribution by employers, and government interest. All these three criteria will actually ensure that you will have sufficient savings, no matter where you are in your life. Okay, and actually, I think one of the your math teachers told me that hey, you actually do learn this in e-math as well, which is quite interesting, I guess. Yeah. So CPF is a way for the government to actually protect the interests of citizens, to ensure that you have enough money to survive for as long as you need to. Okay, now we move on to the next part. Just now, we talked about the role of government in working for the good of society. Next, we are going to talk about citizens and how citizens can and should contribute. Remember, in the first chapter, we talked about contributing and participating in public affairs as individuals and as groups, so informal and formal groups. We're gonna re-look at the topic right now, right? As individuals, of course, if we want to contribute to the good of society, we can do so by volunteering time lah, effort, money, to any causes that you think will promote the well-being of our society. Okay, these perhaps it leads to like immediate results and a direct benefit from your contribution. Okay, so as individuals, you are very passionate about something, so your impact, okay, the result will be immediate, will be direct, because you are just an individual yourself. Yeah, so as individuals, of course, there is always the option, right, to do so by participating as a part of our organized groups. Okay, so organized groups, I mean, we can usually in this case we are referring to mainly as those formal groups. Okay, so Singaporeans influencing government's decision making process is also a way to contribute back to the society, because you're making your views clear. You're telling the government, hey, maybe we should do things in this way. Maybe more people will be able to benefit in this way. So as organized groups, your reach is larger, your voice is larger as well, because you are a legitimate organization. You have the legitimacy to say things. You have the manpower. You have the resources to back you up and to push for certain things. Okay, so NGOs, non-governmental organization, you need to understand this. So these are organizations, independent organizations, all right, they are not essentially not set up by the government. Okay, yeah, so in 2011, and then two NGOs concerned about welfare of domestic workers, so this is their cause here, right, suggested to the government that all domestic workers in Singapore should be given a day off work each week. And in fact, this suggestion was accepted by Singapore's government and then afterwards implemented. Another one in 2014, Singapore Environment Council, okay, this is a government based agency, all right, invited different NGOs to talk about their thoughts on Singapore's future when it comes to environment, especially with climate change nowadays. So they came up with a consensus, all right, and of course we see today that those actions are still in play. We have our SG Green Plan and whatnot, right? So yeah, so as you can see, the might, okay, and the voice that citizens have when it comes to decision making is a very large one. Okay, citizens do have the power, all right, to make changes, all right, that they see fit, and to benefit the society at large. Okay, Yeah, so it's not just the government who is supposed to do this. Citizens themselves, okay, ourselves, we also have a role to play in making Singapore a better place. And the last part for today, we're gonna talk about strengthening our sense of belonging. Okay, so yeah, so when we talk about this idea, okay, of uh hold on, did I skip a page? Sorry. Yeah, I skipped a page, no wonder. Oops, my apologies. Okay, here. Oh my goodness. Okay, can. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Let me continue from here. Okay, so just now we were talking about individuals, right? Participation in these ideas as individuals. Actually, it's a similar idea. Okay, so contributing to needs of society. Just now it was individuals, now we talk about organized group. As we said just now, right? NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and VWOs, voluntary welfare organization. These people, all right, these organizations, they play a complementary role. So essentially, they are helping the government help society become better. Okay, so the conviction that not just individuals but also groups have, they make Singapore a better place to live in. Okay, so this is the way that citizens contribute back to Singapore society at large. Of course, this also helps them to work for the betterment of society. This was the part we're talking about just now, influencing governmental decisions. One of the roles of citizens in Singapore is also to help make decisions. Okay, so help the government make decisions. Let them know what you want to see. Okay, as individuals, we have a role to play. Okay, we talked about what? We talked about giving feedback, okay, for decision making. Okay, we talked about our Singapore conversation. Okay, essentially this is a platform, right, for citizens to share their views, right? So 2012, 2012, okay, lasted for a few years, I think. Yeah, so essentially this is one of the ways. It's only example. There have been many different initiatives enacted by the government to encourage Singapore citizens to come forth and give their suggestion on policy making. Okay, so as you can see, it allowed Singapore government to understand better what Singaporeans actually wanted. Okay, for example, the result actually show that Singaporeans wanted a society rooted in values, better collaboration between government and citizens, better jobs, shared identity, and they have a broader definition of success. So as you can see, the feedback, all right, the feedback that OSC actually gave the government is very important when it comes to future policy making as well. Okay, and obviously, uh, you know, the government isn't gonna do this on their own, right? Because they are people themselves, they won't know exactly what the citizens want, right? So the feedback is important to help them be informed continuously on what the citizens actually want. After all, the government is simply a representation of the citizens. They are our representatives, right? So we should help one another so that we can help the country progress as a whole. And same thing, just now we talked about this part on organized group. So we can help with decision making process, not just as an individual, but also as a part of organized groups. Okay, strengthening sense of belonging, the last part. So we talked about OSC. We said that it made the government clearer on what Singaporeans' aspirations for the future were. Okay, and they realized, all right, that involving citizens in decision making will actually allow Singaporeans to develop a stronger sense of attachment. In Unit 1, we discussed what happens when Singaporeans or whoever, whatever citizens don't have this strong sense of attachment, their allegiance gets affected, their patriotism get affected, and they don't have a sense of belonging. They feel like Singapore is not their home because the government is not listening to their feedback. So end up it's just government doing whatever they want. And as a result, they don't feel like Singapore is their home anymore. So by involving citizens in the decision making process, this gives them a better sense of belonging. And remember, we link this to one of the principles of good governance, right? Providing a stake for everyone. Okay, so actually the government did understand the power of social media itself. Okay, so ministers, MPs, they took to social media to hear directly from the people what they wanted to say to the government. Different ideas, different policies, different suggestions that they may have. Okay, and of course the government set up their own portal, Reach at Home. Okay, Reach, it's just called Reach. Okay, reaching everyone for active citizenry at home. So this is a platform, right, where Singaporeans can actually go online and give suggestions for new policies or give comments on existing or proposed policies. Okay, and of course ministers and MPs, like I said, they are using social media, their own social media, to ask and engage citizens when it comes to decision making process and any policy that may arise from that. By doing so, it gives a connection, right? So between the government and between citizens, there is now this connection. Because citizens, as citizens of Singapore, we have certain ideas because we are what makes up Singapore in general, right? And the government, they are representatives. They are educated people. They're experts in their fields. And we elect them so that they can represent us at the highest level and to make good decisions that will help Singapore as a country. So when we put this link together, government plus citizens, together they can create a good society, one that is progressing, one that is improving and actively seeking for the betterment of everybody's lives. Okay, so the majority's lives. So this cannot work with just government alone or citizens alone. Both citizens and government must work together so that we are able to achieve a good society. We can work for the betterment of our society and will ensure that Singapore is something that we are all proud of and is something that we can safely call our home. And which is why this bond or this connection between government citizen when it comes to decision making, when it comes to security, this is very, very important. And this is the true test of the actual strength, the actual power of this country. If we have a country that is divided, government and citizens are divided. If we have a country where the citizens are unwilling to contribute, if we have a country where the government is overbearing, then that country probably will not be able to function as effectively, function for the benefit of everybody as we hope. So the importance between government and citizens, this is very important, and it's something that Singapore, we obviously have to keep trying. We are doing quite well, but there is always room for improvement. So this bond, I hope you understand. I hope you remember this one because it's going to be a very, very important concept. Okay, yeah, and so that's it for this chapter, and we have concluded the entire issue on citizenship and governance. All right, so I hope you remember these key ideas because these are very, very, very important ideas, and you can use them to your benefit when it comes to writing your SRQ responses, for example, or even helping you understand your source-based case study, right? Yeah. So before I end, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties you saw on the screen and me skipping a page that sometimes it's late in the night actually, so it gets a bit muddle-headed sometimes. So I do apologize for that, but I hope you understand. And if you have any questions or something you're unclear with, please feel free to write it in the comment section below. And yeah, of course, if you do like this lecture, please give me a like, and of course subscribe to the channel if you want to. It will give myself and my team a lot of support, and we hope that we have helped you on your journey towards the O-level exams at the end of this year. Right. So that's it from me for today's lecture. All right. I hope you learned something. I wish you all the best for your revision and upcoming assessments. I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye bye.